everyone, we're going to get started in a second. Good evening, welcome all. My name is Ruba Katrib, and I'm the Chief Curator and Director of Curatorial Affairs here at MoMA PS1. And I'm thrilled that we're going to have this roundtable program for the Studio Museum in Harlem's 2023-2024 Artist in Residence exhibition. Apologies. And this year it's called Pass, Carry, Hold. And I want to thank you all for being here today, for joining our discussion in celebration of this incredible cohort. Sonia, Louise Davis, I'll give you a second for applause. Malcolm Peacock, and Zoë Pulley. And so today there's going to be a conversation between the artists and Yelena Keller, who's the assistant curator at the Studio Museum. Now in its 55th year, the Studio Museum's iconic Artist in Residence program has given emerging artists an unparalleled opportunity to develop their practice in an 11-month residency, and it offers audiences the chance to view this work in an annual exhibition and accompanying programs. So we want to extend our thanks to the numerous supporters of this exhibition and the Artist in Residence program. And this also marks the 6th year of an ongoing partnership between the Museum of Modern Art and MoMA PS1 and the Studio Museum, which sees the annual Artist in Residence exhibition take place here while the Studio Museum continues construction on its new home on 125th Street in Harlem. And I have to say, it's been fantastic to be hosting the residency here, the exhibition here during this time. And we've had the great privilege of working with so many incredible artists and the team at the Studio Museum. And I want to extend my deep congratulations to Sonia, Malcolm, and Zoe. Today is an opportunity to honor you, your commitment to your practice, and as a result, the incredible works we are here to celebrate and discuss. So now I'll introduce Shanta Lawson, the Senior Director of Learning and Engagement at the Studio Museum for some additional remarks. Thank you all.
Thank you, Ruba. Good evening, everyone. We are so grateful for our partnership with the entire team at MoMA PS1, which allows us to continue this critical component of our programming while we await the opening of our new home. Your vision and generous collaborative efforts brought this exhibition and today's program to life. I would like to congratulate Yelena and Jody Groff, Assistant Curator at MoMA PS1, co-organizers of Pass, Carry, Hold, for their leadership, dedication, and energy that they've poured into the residency program and the exhibition. I would also like to extend my congratulations to Adria Gunter, Curatorial Assistant at the Studio Museum, whose exhibition research and support was essential in organizing this show. We would also like to thank Pro Bono ASL for providing American Sign Language interpreter for today's discussion. Thank you, Theo. Please note this program is being recorded. Before I pass things along to Yelena, I'll share brief introductions to our artists in residence. Sonia Louise Davis is a visual artist, writer, and performer born and raised in New York City. She employs methods of improvisation to channel a sense of wonder, experimentation, and play in her work. Building upon a long-standing tradition of Black feminist abstraction, Davis's practice incorporates vibrant colors, organic gestures, and musical interventions. She lives and works in Harlem. Malcolm Peacock is an artist and athlete whose art often utilizes and alternates common physical actions, talking, gazing, braiding, singing, running, to emphasize the stakes and feelings that accompany being present in proximity to others and to oneself. His art looks closely at ways that intimacy creates emotional spaces occupied by Black folks. Zoë Pulley is a designer and maker who utilizes stuff to surface the seemingly ordinary stories of Black folks through mixed media, typography, and audio. She defines stuff as artifacts both physical and non-physical that may be relegated as unimportant to some as merely stuff. That was only a preview. I invite everyone to view the artists' full bios on the Studio Museum's website, along with a host of interviews, articles from their time as artists in residence at the Studio Museum. And with that, it's my pleasure to turn the program over to Yelena. Thank you.
Thank you, Shanta, and thank you, Ruba, and thank you to everyone here in this room for joining us today. It has been a profound honor to work with the three of these incredible artists, Malcolm, Zoe, and Sonia. Your work is urgent, it is bold, it is thoughtful and considered. The exhibition on view down the hall, past Carrie Hold, is an opening and a portal into the ways in which each of you are thinking so deeply about care and support. We've talked intimately about cycles of transition and transfer. Your work and this exhibition is an intimate and important reminder of the importance of all that comes before us, right? A recognition of ancestry, both the known lineages and the unknown, but it's also firmly planted on the ground, in some ways literal, and in other ways more abstract, recognizing the kind of importance of wonder and experimentation and play as we look towards more expansive futures. I'd like to start with a very broad and open question, but I hope this will lay the groundwork for this discussion as well. This is a question about time. The way that time shows up in each of your work is kind of wild and important, and I think runs as kind of a through line as we understand each of your practices alongside one another. So I wonder if each of you might talk a little bit about your relationship to time and the importance of time within your practice. Malcolm, you want to start? It's on when it's up.
Yeah. Can everyone, yep, everyone can hear this? I think so. Okay, great. Thanks again for being here. Could we get like a general one? It doesn't have to be the last, but like huge roaring applause for Yelena Keller. Yelena's been like, has really ushered us through like, I feel like the exhibition, but also everything that could come after this. I feel like when we think about time, the time that we spent together, the three of us, and also the time that we spent with Yelena, I think it's really set us up for markers of what is possible for artists, especially when they work in relation to institutions. So over the past year, I think working on this project, I've just been thinking a lot about time as space and less as something that is concretized by measure. And I've been trying to, I think, conceive of ways to occupy that space. Whether that is fast or whether that's slow, when I didn't really know what was happening with my project, because it is it was a massive production, that type of undertaking. I worked on these really small, little, almost invisible micro braids that were only known to be braids if you like ran and rubbed your fingers against them. And I think in that time and in that moment of the residency, I was processing how little it was going to matter what I actually made for the show. And what mattered more was like how I occupied and how I felt in the space of time, and making those small braids really helped me to expand upon like why I've been so interested in endurance-based practices for so long. yeah, so I think for me, I was trying to sort of slow down time throughout the last 12 months.
Okay, I'm up. Hi, everyone. First, I want to second Malcolm on one, thanking you all for being here today, taking the time. And two, big shout out to Yelena again. As some of you in this room may know, this is actually my first time being an artist in residence in this institutional capacity. And Yelena, the ongoing joke for me this year has been, like, I call her mom, because, like, she's been truly comforting in so many ways, and I don't want to get choked up right at the get-go of this, so I'm going to close it there. But I also, seconding Malcolm, when I think about time, it really is place, but more of a place that can be revisited, or a place that can be reimagined or imagined if it hasn't existed priorly. When I say that, I think, about the ways in which my work really is this conversation between various people that I've met or have not met, family members, friends, community members, people that I just look to and aspire to. And with that, I feel like each one of those conversations, each one of those readings, each one of those moments in which I'm listening to these voices, I'm having time with. And to me, it feels particularly important to be able to remember that sort of agency, I guess, that time can be revisited, that things don't have to necessarily be lost, that things that might not be existing currently can, these places can be created. Yeah, and I would say, over the course of the residency, my work in particular has definitely been operating in that sort of mode. But then my personal relationship with time has been trusting that time is unfolding the way that it's supposed to. Yeah, so I'll just leave it there.
So much of what you both said really, really resonated with me, and I think that was a through line through the entire year, that we were so individual in our studio practices and yet really so much in dialogue materially and with some of the kind of larger concepts that we're wrestling with. For me, I think time absolutely is cyclical and, can be thought of more like pacing, phrasing. I mean, I'm always thinking back to music, right? But there is this feeling that the year, was it a year? Did we have a whole year? I don't really know. The lived experience of every day showing up to make work. And for me, it was a kind of a process of discovery, showing up to make and taking stock several months later of what have I done here? Where's the exhibition in all of this, right? So very much thinking in curves and swoops and dashes about the feeling of time passing, or the agency we all have to slow down time when we're alone working with our hands in our studios.
I think I'll just really briefly add that I think in the residency, a lot of our friends that we have that have been in the program in the past years, around maybe I remember around Thanksgiving time, I was having a conversation with Ellis, a former artist in residence, and I was saying that, I was like, yeah, I mean, I'm not really sure, I don't know, I'm just kind of thinking right now, and they were like, yeah, you have time, you're good. And I remember maybe in the spring, we were having lunch one day, and we were all like, yeah, it's something's changing. And then by June, it was just all right, we're working. It was really all hands on deck, and that was an exciting moment, because I think we had to trust that that we could spend and occupy the time knowing that we would get wherever we needed to be ultimately.
Yeah, I love this idea of trust, because I do think that the three of you have been such a model of the power of support in this program, as evidenced by your immense thoughtfulness already on the stage, but of course as well in the exhibition. And so many trust exercises are involved in the process of making in a residency, but also just in the studio, right? Sonia, you talked about this as well, right? Embracing a sense of unknowing through your work. Malcolm, this was a massive trust exercise. And, you know, I think I'd love to just talk about sort of the objectness of this, trees, a tree. You have created an interpretive sculpture of a redwood tree, and it stands at 8 feet tall. It almost fills the entire room, and really echoes the sort of enormity and scale of these trees in the world, known to be the tallest trees in the world. I'd love if you could talk a little bit about why redwood trees, and sort of what the symbolism is within your work of these trees.
Yeah, I was coming to the studio a lot, or every day pretty much in the fall, and around November sometime, I was just getting bogged down by not doing anything, or like not knowing what was going to happen. And I work in a really project-based manner, so it's really when resources are available and I feel that I'm not taking the use of them, I start to feel like guilt and like studio fever and stuff. So I stopped coming to the studio and I started trying to walk from Brooklyn to Harlem, which never happened. But one day I got to the Lower East Side and I was like, well, I'm still trying to figure out like what this object in like the natural world is, because I've been having these intense experiences in the Pacific Northwest in the summer times. I wanted to figure out what it was going to be during this year that I would make that could resonate as like an object that had a level of force that was quiet but also really sovereign and didn't over-announce itself, but whose presence was like really self-determined and basically like something that couldn't be contested with maybe by people. And nature to me feels like to be the only thing that can really do that maybe like actually really dwarfs us or like humbles us and makes us like really step back and kind of like shut up. And I was walking that one day and I looked up and I was like, oh, it's a tree. I was like, it's a braided tree. And I knew the gallery that I wanted to use, and then the project shifted and changed when we found out that this space would be a different space than the Studio Museum exhibition has usually been held in PS1. So I knew it wasn't enough for it to be like a tree or for that to be the first thought. So I got into like a deep podcast reading wormhole about trees. And then I heard this, like a botanist talk about what his favorite tree was and why. And he said most people would just kind of say like a pine or a willow tree. And he said a coastal redwood. And then I started to learn more about coastal redwoods. And one day, Yelena and I were sitting down, and I was like, I think I want to make a redwood tree. And I expected some sort of tension there around like logistics or size or scale. And Yelena just kind of like, like leaned in. It was like, oh yeah, let's do this. Let's make a redwood tree. And yeah, I think the redwood could hold all of these ideas around support that I had developed in the Northwest. It was something that I started thinking about a lot while out there, because there are not really Black folks in mass in the Pacific Northwest. You know, there's some people in the audience who are Black natives of Pacific Northwest. There's strong immigrant communities out there, but as like a solo visitor to that part of the world, there was a lot of beauty in being there alone, and a lot of like sorrow and isolation. And one of the things that really kept me like mentally safe was thinking about the ways that my family had fears for me going there for the first time. But when I thought of the redwood, it seemed like the object that would encompass how I navigated getting through what I perceived to be and what sometimes were dangerous situations in the state of Oregon and the state of Washington. So a redwood support system is 10 feet tall, but the tree itself is 300 feet. So it means that its support system is interlocking and doesn't end. And that reminded me of like a spiritual presence or a sense of memory from my family, most like notably from my mother. So that was like how I came to that. I knew I wanted to make it to be this particular type of tree.
Thank you, Malcolm. Yeah, I love this kind of notion of thinking about roots and support, which is present across each of your work in different ways. In particular, Zoe, I think it's stark, the kind of inclusion of familial archive throughout your practice. As you're standing in the galleries, you can quite literally hear familial histories in the space, as well as seeing photography, documentation, a true sort of presence of the literal archive of your family, which is such a vulnerable and tender offering to us all, but also is a jumping off point for you in so many ways, in the ways that you are making and what sort of brings you to the space of making. So I wonder if you might talk a little bit about what it means for you to work with your family in this capacity, and also sort of what archives mean to you and to your family as well.
Yeah, totally. For one, I do want to start off by touching on, like you said, the vulnerable piece. It's like, for me, the work that I've been making, it's the same shit that I've been doing for like the last, I don't even know, 10 plus years, and I've never thought of it as work until recent years, honestly. So I think I'm still kind of figuring out what it means to have a practice that revolves around familial archive and have it be presented in certain spaces, and realize that every time I do present it in a new space, there's like a new reckoning that I kind of have to like grapple with and figure out and decide, like, hey, what does it mean to have this part of us in this place? But with that, I think that my, I'll call it innate sort of like fondness, connection, to this type of making, to these archival materials. It's really me just wanting to be like my grandmother. Her name is Sandra Hightower, Sandra Olivia Moon Hightower, and she is, in essence, like the ultimate archivist, historian, like storyteller in my mind. And ever since I was a child, like going to her house meant that we were going through some box of something, either that she had made herself, she herself is a creative, things that she had saved from her childhood, just various odds and ends. And as I've gotten older, as our friendship just continues to blossom, I'm recognizing what a privilege it is that I have a grandmother who has been so intentional her entire life. And then with that, her mother, same type of intention, right? Because she passed on these various items to her. So I guess to me, I'm trying to operate in a mode in which I've learned from them, which is how can I continue to hold on to these things while simultaneously still ensuring that my understanding of these things, or like the way that I am connecting these dots, can also be passed on as, I guess, almost as a sort of guide. And when I say passed on, I'm thinking about my kin, I'm thinking about my family, the people who are coming after me. And I will say, like, over the last year, that type of understanding, or of that sort of like holding on to and passing on, has become very important, because otherwise it's so easy to lose sight of what the work is really doing and who it's really intended for. So when I get into places, spaces in which I am sharing a part that feels very sensitive to me, very vulnerable, I just remind myself, hey, but in the cheesy sort of cliche, this is for my grandmother, or this is for my dad, or this is for my aunt, and immediately that allows me to like get back to the root of what it is that I'm doing, the true intention, and trust that the work is doing as intended. So yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. Clap. We love the Sonics, yes. So many ways of showing support. Yeah, I love everything, but I think, you know, inside of the exhibition and as you're moving through these spaces, you each have created such intentional portals, it feels like. This show, it feels like it is echoing and screaming and singing and kind of has such an energy to it. And I think the sort of intentionality, just to bring that word back in again, is so deeply felt. Sonia, we talked so much about how to create a space that felt like an echo of the energy of your work in this show. You have been working deeply with tuftings over the last several years. You lovingly refer to them as soft paintings, an embrace of what softness even is. And for this show, there was such a bold and brave, but also really important decision to install 2 of the soft paintings on poles. So they're suspended within the center of the gallery, which guides our movement around the room. Can you talk about making soft paintings, what the process is and what brought you to this medium, and then as well the sort of decision to show them in the round?
Absolutely. I think so much of my work is guided by a practice of improvisation, and when I finished a rather kind of critical theory heavy year at the Whitney ISP, I was really eager for the handheld and the physical and like material again. And I think, you know, right after that, I began weaving on a floor loom, which I liked because there's an element of spontaneity and play, but it has to come after like many hours of preparing the loom, right? It's like maybe 75% prep for 25% fun, for me, fun of actually weaving cloth. And I was searching for a way to stay in a fiber conversation to some degree, because I feel like there is an association and a kind of familiarity that we have. There's like kind of an accessibility thing there for me around cloth and fiber and yarn, but I personally found that tufting was the posture I wanted, the standing and moving and almost dancing with the material was extremely like affirming in my body, which was what I was wanting. And so as soon as I started tufting, I like couldn't stop, and I had several years of like just the kind of practicing that you do when you're learning a new material, a new medium. And I love being an amateur at something. I think I've moved through many mediums over the last, 15 years of being an artist, and this one has stuck for quite a long time. I think it's a way to get at some of those ideas around spontaneous composition, certainly the physical, but what is important to me about this hang here and the choices I made around install was to give over the view that I have as I am working, because I work from behind, I work from the back, and so letting the viewers into my POV felt important, as well as kind of making a choreography through the gallery space that would guide you through in this kind of cyclical, circular motion, but also end you up in this, experimental sound space. So I feel like those several decisions all kind of came cascading and felt extremely right.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think it's very interesting to think about practice across each of you. You all have practices outside of that are kind of informing your art practice or kind of in conversation with one another. And each of you are so multidisciplinary in that way. And that really comes through in this work. It's all informed by sort of all of these layers of self and life that's brought you through these sort of various modes of transition. Malcolm, running is a huge part of your life. You are a long-distance runner, semi-professional, dare I say. He says, no, Malcolm's very serious, very serious. And, I think that how running shows up in your practice takes many forms. In the gallery, we can literally hear you running through the audio that is playing, the sort of steps and breath and exchange of voice gives the sort of energy around the sculpture and a sort of animated quality. And also, of course, as a long-distance runner, you have a relationship to endurance that feels very palpable in the sort of object of the work. Can you talk about how this work considers your personal relationship with running, but as well to perhaps the sort of historical lineages of running as tied to Black people?
Yeah, I think I think there's like a way in which I really wanted the tree to have the qualities of a performer. And I think there's like perform in terms of the stage. We can maybe think of that in like song or acting or something. And then there's also like perform in terms of like execution, which is like the definition that I'm really interested in. But in running, there's like a pace, there's a categorization of pace that's called like threshold. And it was always described to me when I was a child as what my coach would call like comfortably hard. So it was a pace that you'd be pushing, sort of pulsing at, but not cracking through in order to like, you're not operating at that pace to find anything new out. You're just like staying somewhere where you're still kind of crafting and shaping your body, but not like making a gigantic breakthrough or something. And so I think for me in this work was like, I really wanted to like go way beyond threshold pace. And like race pace is sort of to be considered the most that you can do on any given day, like giving it your all. And I kind of wanted to try to like crack way through that too. So, yeah, I think I was trying to like make an attempt through thinking about running as a space just for like testing out things or for like trying to evolve or to trying to like cross a border or to transform. Whether it be like transform my body. I think in this case, in this piece, a lot of it was to like, I wanted to figure out if I could, kind of like cross over a mark that I hadn't conceived of as possible before. And so that's like how I often use running as a marker in the practice as well. So it comes up, I think, in this piece is like, okay, well, can we attempt a scale that is like a gigantic sort of leap from the last maybe like 7 foot wide, but 1.5 foot tall thing? And what would that, what kind of arms and hands and tentacles would that end up taking? Like, I think a lot of that we didn't know. And we just had to keep figuring it out as we went. And in the installation, some of the sound works are done alongside a training partner of mine named Ainsley. And he's just been really instrumental in me like meeting in New York, starting to meet and develop a relationship with other Black distance endurance runners, which is something that I've never had before, like in the 16 years that I've been practicing and racing. And so to pair that alongside of the redwood, which is only really thrives in a certain region of the United States that really, really has like no relationship to Black endurance athletes, felt like really poignant and really important to like place those things into the same environment together. And, you know, hopefully that it's maybe like 30, 40 seconds at the beginning of the audio where you hear both of us speaking in unison, but we choreographed that at like 6 in the morning in the Bronx, and it was this really, really special moment because I realized that like, oh, this thing that I wanted to make the whole residency like ends up happening on like September 19th, you know, and then the show opens 5 days later. But having the space to do that set up this marker for like, okay, well, now this is a form that we can start to bring other Black endurance athletes into, to sort of like stretch this out, to sort of do more choreo, to really like think about what unison and concert and being like in a cyclical form together can really shape or make, and how does that push emotion more?
Thank you. Yeah, each of your work is so consistent and methodical, and I feel always, you know, the studios are active and alive every year, but I think even just the way that each of you showed up to the studios, right? Sometimes when there wasn't much to do or you didn't know what the day would bring, just speaks to that too, that kind of consistency. Zoe, you have a background in design, speaking of sort of other practices, right? Or kind of connected practices. And I'd love to talk a little bit about clothing, right? There are kind of actual items or garments that you have crafted for this show, and also a kind of dialogue or conversation about clothing and its importance within the exhibition as well. I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about what clothing sort of means to you and sort of the role of these garments within your practice.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, clothes. I mean, clothes are part of the archive. It's part of the stuff definition that I've been playing with for a while now, it feels like. Yeah, similar to the various objects, photos, ephemera, things that I've spoken to before, clothing was functioning the same way. My grandmother, Sandra, again, she studied fashion design. She did her own DIY fashion shows in Philly for years. And with that, other matriarchs on my dad's side of the family have carried on sewing, traditions. Quilting is a big one. And of course, just making clothes for the many children that were in those families. So to me, it feels like one of those things that, again, just feels intrinsic. I learned how to sew at a very young age, and I had a lot of fun doing it. And as I've gotten older, it's become this connection point, right? Like, again, it's going back to that time being place, or, time being a place. It's almost been like this gateway in which I am able to not only learn from women in my family who have sewn, but learn about the reasons why they were sewing, the things that they were making, the ways in which they were making them. So it goes back into this like mode of making as being a carrier of knowledge. And in the pieces for the show, I was very interested in this question around like, what is a memory that that family members have with clothing items that were, in their closet. And the beginnings of that inquiry really started way back in high school. I wrote like this little 6-word memoir for a creative writing class, and it was found myself in my grandmother's closet. And for some reason, that little line stuck with me, and it really emphasizes, again, the way in which I was learning about my familial history by way of clothing, by way of these things that were kept within these spaces. So I just became interested in using that as like a portal to be able to then learn what might seem to, a family member who I'm asking this question to might seem like, hey, who cares? I have this bathrobe that I got from this trip in Japan, right? But from there, like the meandering of conversation, of story, of histories that come out of that, is what really gets me jazzed. And the coolest part is like after these conversations, after work is made, having my family members actually come in and see what to them felt so menial become like this thing that is now, I'm not going to call it monument because the scale of it is not monumental, but to them it's just like making this thing that seems so small so much larger, and bringing new meaning to it. And to have the privilege, the space, the access to be able to do that right now, like that isn't lost on me. So yeah, clothing to me is just like another one of those gateways. So yeah.
Thank you, Zoe. Yeah. Zoe is a fan. Sonia, I'd love to talk about improv. You mentioned improv a little bit earlier this evening. And again, as sort of person who is bringing in a practice that maybe sort of germinated before these tufted pieces, which is jazz vocal performance. Your work is, again, so alive, even inside of its, fixedness as an object. And the environment you've crafted does so much of this. The sonic space does so much of this. And then within the composition of the work as well. Can you talk about your relationship to improvisation, how that relates to your sort of engagement with and love, really, of jazz, and how that shows up in your work?
Yeah, I don't consider myself a singer any longer, but I think you don't lose it. So there's a kind of an ear that stays, and I have training in undergraduate at that level of kind of like performing with ensembles. I think I took from it this sense of absolutely listening being kind of more important than whatever else you might make, whatever else you might utter, right? But I think it's a way that I've seen more expansively kind of like an awareness of what's around you, very much, I think, similar to Malcolm, your description of running and the presentness in your physical body that's necessary for what you're making, right? And I think that kind of critical awareness has guided most of what I've done since I was able to understand myself as an artist. And certainly so much of what is joyful about making has this to do with listening and being present and kind of seeing yourself create something that you couldn't have conceived of before. I always think it's important to push at, like Malcolm, you talked about that threshold, right? Or Zoë kind of like talking about like being at that space of intimacy and trust that you need to get there to go further, right? And so I think of each composition as being something that happens in the moment. They're always becoming. I don't have a plan when I begin, and I never sketch ahead because it's not going to be as compelling and interesting and full of energy and experimental kind of thrust if I were to draw it. I have a drawing practice alongside of the tufting, right? But they're not one and the same. And then with the sound, I think if you haven't been inside the annex space in the gallery, have a seat, sit there, let the audio wash over you. It's recorded live from a performance this past April, and the instruments are invented by me. They're all steel instruments, and I entrusted 3 women performers to come and play them. And I think that there was an absolute feeling of unknowing and kind of throwing out whatever preconceived notion we might have about what this strange shaped thing might sound like. But we got to some other transcended space together. And I think it was really an honor to be able to present this sound here in dialogue with the soft paintings, which of course are soft and therefore absorbent. I always think about the environment in which the works are on view as being dynamic and charged, and the fact that the soft paintings are listening and are kind of sucking up the sound in the space feels, again, really significant and really in line with a lot of the work and the thinking I've done around improvisation.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Our time is flying. I do want to ask maybe one quick question before we turn over to audience questions. I'd love if each of you could put out a word or a phrase into the air, something, a mantra maybe, that folks can hold on to as they step into the galleries. What's something that you want us to think about or hold dearly?
I can go. Struggling.
No, but I'm just like, what if I have the same one?
Do you? Okay. In our beautiful publication, which is now live, wow, there is an incredibly generous, thoughtful essay that Yelena has written, and we had this really beautiful meeting, whenever that was, to talk about what is our show. And you offered the text by Zora Neale Hurston, John Redding Goes to Sea, and I read it. It's a short story. I read it in an airport, and I wept reading it. And there is a line from that I want to offer, which is very apt for fall right now, a riot of color in nature.
I can go, yeah. I mean, the first word that comes to mind, I'm bouncing off of Sonia and the conversations that we had at that time about the show. And after reading that piece, a big connection point to me was endurance, but 3 different types of endurance within our practices. And I will also say that with viewing the work, there is a certain level of endurance in each interaction of each space. So, yeah.
Just generally, and I guess specifically looking at the work too, that the necessity for change.
Thank you. And now we'll open up to the audience for questions. I think we have some folks with microphones. I have more. Oh, yes, we have one.
I had a question for Sonia. I was wondering, I noticed in a lot of your pieces that there were empty spaces in which there was no tufting on the loom. And it really stands out, I think, more than any of the contrasting colors in terms of kind of the landscape feeling. And I was wondering how you thought about those empty spaces and what they mean to you.
Wow, thank you for that question. I have not done that before. That feels like specific to this time at Studio Museum. It feels like a break. It feels like a pause. It feels like a rest. It actually feels like a breath. Again, something that I think is shared among the 3 of us very much palpably, right? But it's something I've not seen, and it was a way to leave something unfilled, I guess. Something that I was hoping for, that I do think happened in the gallery, was also that light passes through that spot differently than everywhere else, and that feels exciting.
Yeah, amazing observation. Oh, we have a couple more in front here.
Hello, thank you guys for speaking. Sometimes I like to just ask artists, just as a fun exercise, what's an art piece that inspired you to start, or an art piece that was so moving to you that you wish you actually made? And maybe one that's popular that maybe some of us would know?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this a lot with the tree, because like last summer I made this piece, and when I finished it, I started thinking about this sculpture that I saw as a boy, and I looked at a picture of it the other day. My father documented a lot of like my family's life. I'd say like maybe pre-2012 on just like digital camera, and he archived everything on discs, and then after he died, we put all of that like archive, I guess, in a more clear virtual space that we all share. And I saw this, the Brooklyn Museum has one, but I saw this at the Baltimore Museum of Art, and it's a Hawaiian pendant necklace that has like, the bottom of it is sort of tied together or held together by a shark tooth, but the necklace itself is plait, it's like braids, like single micro braids. And they are smaller. I'd say they're like, each of them is half the size of the braids, generally, of the most, like the braid size that shows up the most on the sculpture here. And so I've been thinking about, like when I saw it, I don't know if my mom's here, my family's here, sorry. I don't know if my mom would remember this, but when we went to the museum that day, there's like videos and photos of a lot of the pieces at the museum. And then there's a photo of this necklace in the case. And when I saw it, I like leaned over, and my mom was like, "Malcolm, don't touch the glass." And I looked at it and I was like, could you do that? Just wondering like how it was made, because I had only ever seen braids done on a head, and I've only ever seen her braid hair. So when I saw these little tiny micros, it was like, I couldn't like fathom the amount of labor, but there was something beyond labor, because I was starting to wonder like what it was for, and by that I mean like who it was for. Because we have this association of braiding that is like almost a sort of sacrificial, like giving of time over for the self to another person. And with this piece, I've been really trying to like achieve that for myself, that like sense of intrigue or mystery or like confusion. And I've like had a really special moment maybe a few days ago where I realized that it matters, but it's not possible, because I made it. So I don't have that relationship to it. But it's been really important to think about like what are things that can do that can like rev you up in a way that, at least I think for makers, it's important for us to think about that. Like, what are things that can like make not the end result, but the thought of the process of doing it, how does that become like something that you want to devour, or something that you want to do? Because I feel like that level of intensity is not something that we really have every day. Like, what are things that we're like itching to do? Like, just like we want to like squeeze all of the juice and seeds out of them. So that's a really like intense, way to describe this sculpture I saw as a little boy. But it's like really been like kind of messing with me, because as we got closer, I would text Yelena like, I think today's the last day, like I think I'm done, or oh my gosh, I'm almost done. And then I would like secretly be like making more braids. like these really tiny ones, because I was trying to like have that moment from childhood, and yeah, I think it's just special to have things that you maybe don't know to be possible. You know?
Oh, yes, okay. Yeah, for me, it was kind of serendipitous with the beginning of the residency, but I was rereading some Gwendolyn Brooks poetry, specifically Bronzeville, and yeah, there's this one poem, and the way that I like read and listen to things, it's like very, very didactic, very like annotation heavy, kind of like obsessively, I guess. And with this poem in particular, I had like just like a ton of notes that I just like questions. I don't even know, like calling them notes even feels like I'm giving them more credit. It's like one word or just like things that pop up into my mind, things that this reminds me of. And I feel like a lot of the way that I read and listen and see things, it's kind of like creating this web of connections. So with Kitchenette Building, there were several things that were coming up for me. My family has roots American South, but Chicago, and then to various other cities within America. And this poem in particular is really reflecting on a kitchenette building within the south side of Chicago, and there's just various motifs that I feel like I quite literally have heard like this story many, many times from different people in my family. So from there, that kind of became like, I guess, the point of departure. And in a similar way as to how I kind of moved through my process, it was like this call and response sort of activity of taking that written piece, responding to by way of visuals, by way of more words, by way of more audio, and just kind of like continually meandering through until there was this other portion of the gigantic web that like is now the work. So yeah.
I'll just say very quickly that there's the commission in the atrium at MoMA right now. You must go see it. It's incredible. The artist is Odabong. She's made a tapestry that is like 100 feet tall and braided ropes holding vessels that are raku fired. I mean, it's a soundscape. It's incredibly brilliant. I saw it 2 days ago and I can't stop thinking about it.
Thank you so much to each of you for just such an engaging and thoughtful conversation, as always. When I saw the three of you today, I said, I miss you, and I really mean it. I am feeling so grateful that we get to spend these next months with your work, and as well for the friendship of knowing each of you that will carry us forward. And I think we'll have some closing remarks. But a round of applause, please.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Just a few words to close. Thank you so much to Sonia, Malcolm, and Zoe for this wonderful conversation, and to Yelena for guiding us through. I also want to thank Shanta for her assistance in organizing this event, as well as our whole team, and Juan Pablo Caicedo Torres in particular in the back, and everyone from our team and our AV team here today. I'm so glad you could all join us, and I encourage you to spend time in the galleries located here on the second floor just down the hall to explore the work of these incredible artists. We're open till 8 p.m. tonight, so please visit all of the exhibitions and join us on the patio for a DJ set by Anito Soul, which is starting right now. So with that, let's give one more round of applause for the artists. Thank you so much.
I know we're done, but there are publications that are free in this at the table in the back.